And welcome, students. We're going to discuss stringing things together. Particularly, we're going to look at the string object and also the string class. So when we're talking about strings, we're not talking about things that are made out of yarn or other similar fabric. Rather, a string is a special object that is used to store and process different types of characters. For our purposes, you can kind of think of a string as a sentence rather than an individual character or number. A quick example of a string would be something like hello reader. We've seen this kind of stuff before. It's in the double quotes that kind of indicates to the program that the double quotes means that this is a string. And we've already been outputting strings in our program without even realizing that we've been doing strings. So for example, when I do console.writeLine quote hello reader, what I'm doing is I'm in effect putting a string out onto the console. Alright, so let's talk about predefined strings. So much of how we define variables, we can also define strings with the same thing. So the format for strings is string followed by name. Variable was the type followed by name. Strings is the same thing. So string name. So for example, I can say string blessing. We can also assign values to that string. So for example, I can say blessing goes live long and prosper. Now typically what will happen though is just like with variables, we're going to define and initialize the string in a single statement. So instead of 2 lines, I'll just say string blessing goes live long and prosper. So it's all just one statement. Like I said, very similar to what we did with variables. Our next thing to talk about is concatenation. Usually we don't just write a single string. We usually concatenate them together with the plus operator. We've already seen this occur in our programs. So for example, console.writeLine, I'm giving the value of n as colon, quote, plus n. Right? The plus n right here is the concatenation. Concatenation just means pretty much you're joining two different objects together. In this case, the string of I'm being the value of n as and the variable n. Now the trick is to always remember that the extra space before you end the quote where you're going to have your characters squeezed together. If you notice right here before I put the colon and then the quote, there's a space right here, simply because if I don't put the space there, when I run the program, the number will literally be right on top of the colon. So I have to remember to add a space. We can also concatenate two strings. So string noun is equal to strings. String sentence is equal to noun plus are cool. Console.writeLine sentence. Right? When we do this, you'll notice that it will output strings are cool because sentence concatenates noun with are cool. So sentence actually has the value strings are cool. All right, next we'll discuss automatic conversion of strings. So the following code will output a value of 142. So console.writeLine 100 plus 42. Right? Pretty much if C# just sees a bunch of numbers in there, it doesn't try to make it a string, it just automatically adds the numbers. Same thing would occur with variables. So if I had a variable A and said it equal to 3 and a variable B and it equals to 5, and then it counts at writeLine A plus B, it just outputs 8. Right, we've seen this in our variable labs when we work with those. However, if we put a string in with a number, it changes from an arithmetic operation to that of a concatenation. So if I do console.writeLine, the answer is plus 42. We're not going to get a numeric value. We're going to get the answer is plus 42. So a quick pro tip for you, if you want to do any kind of arithmetic operations inside of a writeLine statement, actually what you want to do is do them before the writeLine statement. So if I wanted to do console.writeLine, the answer of A plus B is, quote, plus A plus B. Sometimes it might work, but a lot of times you get some really kind of funky behaviors going on. So it's better just to add A and B before your writeLine. And then actually display the sum using like the third variable or something like that. So again, we want to make sure we're doing our arithmetic operations beforehand. Some quick terminologies to throw at you here for this lesson, because there are going to be some things we start throwing around as we move into some of these different things. The first is, of course, class. The class is a name for a type whose values are objects. Everything we've been doing has been in a single class at this point, so it's not really something we have to worry about too much. But you can think of a class as the big object which controls different features. If you think back to our box example, the box would be like is object of that class. Objects, these are entities that store data and can take actions. These are things you can create in your program that make stuff happen. So again, that would be our box example right here. This is our object, right? So that would be that piece right there. All right, methods, these are actions that the object can take. These are predefined actions that are defined by the class of an object. So methods would be things like this: area, volume, surface area, etc. Those would be methods. Right? Predefined action. And we're going to look at a couple methods here in a second for when you have strings. So for example, string with a capital S is a class that uses the string object. You can create a string sentence object, and then you can call actions upon the string, which we're going to look at next. So one of the first methods or first actions that we can kind of work with here is string.length. This is a command to pretty much return the length of a string. Length here is defined as the number of characters in the string object. So, for example, we have string sample equals hello. That would return a character length of 5. Whereas the string name of Mr. Rogers would have a character length of 10. You'll notice that it has a character length of 10 because the space matters. So even if you have just a bunch of spaces, each one of those spaces counts as a character. Now, calling the command is easy enough to do. All I do is I do console.writeLine name.length. And that's really all I have to do, and it will just do the rest. Now, if for some reason you get an error with some of these codes and you start looking, it's like, well, why is this not doing? You may just have to add an empty set of parentheses right here after this function name. And that would be it. So let's look at string.equals other string. So this is how you test to see if two strings are equal. And pretty much if they have the exact same content. So here I have string greeting equals hello, add string second equals hello. Obviously, we can look at that right away and see that these two strings are different because one has an uppercase and one has a lowercase. So we can generalize this either as console.writeLine, quote, a dot equals b equals true, or console.writeLine, b dot equals a equals true. What that does, it would pretty much tell us whether or not they're equal. It would turn true or false. True meaning that they're equal, false meaning they're not. Right. Next is to lower. So this converts all the characters in a string to lowercase. So for example, string greeting is equal to high jump. String greeting dot to lower returns as high jump. Similar with string dot to upper, it converts all characters to uppercase. String greeting equals greetings. Greeting dot to upper will then return greetings. Now, string to trim removes any leading or trailing whitespace characters. Whitespace are characters that would print as a whitespace on paper, such as anything from your spacebar, the tab button, and even the new line character, which is the equivalent of hitting enter on your keyboard. So here's a quick example. I have string sample is equal to, and you can see it's spacing with a lot of space around it. And if I do string.trim, that's going to return spacing. Next up is string.substring with the start and end value. All right, this returns the value of the string at the starting of the value. Note the starting position of a string is not 1. Right? Even though we might think it's 1, it actually has to do with how strings are indexed, and so the initial value is always set to 0. So our first position is always going to be 0. So therefore, if we define a substring with two parameters, here I have string str is equal to abcdefg. AC string.substring 33 is going to return df. Even though D is the 4th character, you have to remember that's because A is at position 0, B is at position 1, C is at position 2, and then D is at position 3. So always remember, you have to kind of remember it starts at 0, so you have to add 1 from what you're counting. All right, that's going to conclude the notes. So we're going to, at this point, switch over to our wonderful little bit of work here with Visual Studio. So I'm going to go ahead and close this solution. Let's go ahead and make a new one. And I'm going to call this string demo. All right, so here we have our program. You can see in here, I have, of course, my console.writeline hello world, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. All right, and to get started here, let's go ahead and create some strings that we can use inside of our program. So I'm going to start with one. I'm just going to call this string, and then I'm just calling it str, and I'm going to give it a value of, let's just say, let's call it first. Okay. So here's one string right here. Now, similarly, if we start having multiple strings, such like we did with variables, I can, of course, just separate them with a comma. So maybe I'll have one that says name instead of equal to Benny Bill, and maybe I'll have another one that says value instead of equal to 23. Right? Reason why I point that out is because you can technically have numeric strings. Okay, even though value could be like an integer or a double or something like that, we're just going to go ahead and give it a numeric value just for our purposes. Right? So first things first, I want to find the length of a string, and then I want to output the value. So let's just start off first with, let's use value. Okay, so if I just say value.length, and I just leave that right there, and then I try to run this program. Actually, that console.readline, so it stays open. Right? You can see that it gives an error here. Right? So it doesn't know what to do with this value.length. So I either have to do one of two things. Either have to store it into a variable in order to have that value be put someplace, because it's reducing a number, or I have to put it inside a console.writeline of value.length. Okay, so now if I run string demo here, I remember the first time takes a little bit. There we go. So it produces the value 2. Okay, because when I look at value, you can see that it only has 2 characters in it. If I wanted to run one of the other ones, for example, Benny Hill, here from name, if I change this over to name.length, you can see that we get the value 10. Right? So that's how you use the length method if I want to do a substring. So I can do a similar thing. So let's just do console.writeline. And let's do this time a substring of, let's do name again. So name.substring. And I have to give it a starting value. So I'm going to say start at value 6, and I'm going to have it go 3 places. So if I go ahead and test that and tell it to run, you can see we get the value HIL because it started at value 6, which is the start of Hill, and it pulled 3 places. Now if I wanted the full version of Hill, obviously I would have to change that from 3 to 4. All right. Next, let's do a quick comparison. So let's do a console.writeline, and let's compare. Let's do a comparison between, let's do str and let's do value. So str dot equals, and we're going to compare that with, we said value. Alright, so if I put this in here like this, give it a second. Alright, 10, HIL, and false. Alright, false meaning that those are not equal. So again, we're looking here that this right here will tell me that that is a false statement. Alright, so I guess one minor revision from the notes there, because I think I had it as with the equals piece. I think I put this equals true in here. We can actually just take and modify this just a little bit here. You just do it like this. Okay, back to our code. Next, if we want to do some other comparisons here, if I want to concatenate two strings, so I'm just going to make a new string here. So I'll say string first name is equal to, let's do name, not first name, full name, equals name plus quote, let's just say junior. Okay. Now, of course, if I do concatenate this as is, reason why, remember one of the things I had mentioned is that you always want to make sure you're adding in proper spacing. So if I go ahead and now put full name, you'll see that when we do that, junior gets stuck right on the end of Hill here. So what I want to do is make sure that I put either a space right here after Hill, or I put a space right here at the start of junior. I'm just going to go ahead and put one right here at the start of junior. Okay. So that's how we can do that. We now concatenated them into a single output. Additionally, if I wanted to not have to create another string like this, and I just wanted to output them, I didn't want to store it in another string, I could have also right here in my write line statement had said that name plus quote junior, and that would also have achieved effectively the same thing. Okay, so next I want to do some escape characters. So I'm going to do console.writeLine, and this time let's do first plus, and if I want to do an escape character, let's do /t plus name. Now you notice I can't just put /t in here because it gave me an error, and first it doesn't know it, it should be str. It's because when you do the escape characters, you have to make sure you put a tab, or not tab, but quotes around them. All right. So now I have str tab name. So let's go ahead and run and see what that tab looks like. And you can see that rather than just being a space here, it has now added this additional room right here. Okay. Now, if I want to do like for example a new line character like /n, I can put those in there as well. It's just you have to put whatever the appropriate character mark would be in there. So you can see now with this new line character, it moves first in Benny Hill to two different lines. Okay. Lastly, let's go ahead and do a little bit of stuff with a number, because that's about the only thing I haven't really talked about. So in here, let's just do a console.writeLine, and we did a value of 23, so I'm just going to do value plus 2. Right. Now I should expect that when I run this program that this is going to produce 23 plus 2. So let's just see what happens when I do this. All right, and we got 232. The reason why I get 232 and not like 25 is because this right here, this value is a string. If I come in here and say int number and set that equal to 23, now I have a traditional numeric value, and I could easily come in here and say console.writeLine number plus 2, and we would get what we would expect of 25. There it is. All right. So one other thing I'm just going to show you with a variable just real quick is with any of these ones that return a value, like name.length, for example, or string.substring, you can store those values also into a variable. So for example, if name.length, I want that to be in a value, so let's just do like int length equals name.length, right? And then I output length. this is in effect the same thing as what we did up here. Right? So two different ways of doing the same thing. Personally, I think just jumping right to this is a little more effective. However, you wouldn't want this if you were to use length for something else. So let's say I wanted to get the length, and then I wanted to do something with the operation value. Like maybe I want to see if if the string contains more than 10 characters. I can do that sort of thing. We haven't talked about how to do that sort of thing yet. Just something else I just wanted to show you. Some of the things you can do here with substring. For example, I could create another string and call it substring value, right? And set that equal to name.substring. And do the same thing as what I did before, 6, 3. Okay. It's going to do the same thing, and if I output substring value, I'm going to get the exact same thing as what I had up here. All right. So that's going to kind of wrap it up for today, folks. Don't really have much more for you other than this. This should give you a good smattering of some example codes for you to look at when we get ready to start our string labs. So